When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I was going to say it's lovely to see you, but just 5 minutes ago, it's a freezing cold evening. I'm £1.60 ahead after 2 days at Cheltenham. Palace aren't playing for 2.5 weeks. Smudge is asleep on the chair next to me. I was feeling relaxed about life, Kieran, and then I don't know how we managed to do this. That even though we've been doing it twice a week, we've pressed the wrong button, so we can't actually see each other.
That's right. So that's those visual ticks that we pick up on each other, which make this such a seamless show, will be lost to the nation.
Let's face it, neither of us would be very good at playing poker, Kieran. It's very easy to tell what everybody's thinking. But I'm just looking at the script and it's a bit disconcerting. So I don't even know if we're recording. I can't even see your usual cheery. This is how technically inept we are. The only reason I know we're actually recording is your cheery smile and your big thumbs up.
That's right.
There must be a way. There must be a way of working out that we're recording. But it's anyway, Kieran. How are you? Where are you? I can't tell.
I'm currently down south.
Lovely.
I was in Liverpool until 2:30 today. So yeah, it's now 7:30, and I'm back in Brighton.
It's Newsday, Kieran, and talking of you being in Liverpool, I wonder if the people in Manchester could hear the sound of laughter coming from Liverpool in the last couple of days. Because I have to admit, Kieran, I was sent a photograph of Man United's new stadium, and I assumed it was some kind of a photoshopped GIF because it doesn't look right. It hasn't particularly gone down well. It doesn't look like £2 billion worth of stadium, Kieran.
It doesn't indeed, and apparently it's down to us not realising that it's the trident of the Red Devil that we should have picked up on. So that they had to go and sort of do an overlay of a trident, and I'm not too sure that many people would have necessarily picked that up independently. But the story is, as has been over all of the newspapers, that Manchester United have announced that the task force that has been looking at the future as far as the club is concerned in terms of where it's going to play its football have decided against extending the existing Old Trafford, and instead they are going to build a 100,000. It says here in our notes 100,000 seater stadium. I was going to say 100,000 capacity stadium because I suspect there will be safe standing.
Okay.
So it's 100,000 capacity. The price which is being mooted is £2 billion. And according to Offshore Jim, he's thinking it will be done in 5 years because he'll be able to take advantage of the Manchester Ship Canal to effectively bring modular elements of the stadium up through the ports along the Ship Canal, and therefore they can effectively be built to a certain extent like a sort of a giant Lego model, which will be intriguing. And as somebody that used to play for Metro Vickers Shipyard's cricket team in Manchester, I'm sort of quite pleased that a sort of part of the history of the city is being utilised in that way. So it is a lot of money. There is no public money going into this, and I think we have to stress this because some fans have already started being a bit chippy about, is it right that a Monaco-based tax exile who owns a share in a company registered in the Cayman Islands and himself has put his investment in through a company in the Isle of Man is getting government support? Well, he's not. So I think you have to separate out all of those issues. But it does appear that there will be a broader regeneration and investment in that part of Manchester, which I think has got to be welcomed by. I used to live in Whalley Range. I used to live in Chorlton and so on. I know the areas of Manchester well. I used to walk from my student accommodation in Whalley Range up to Old Trafford. I'd go and watch United in the City every week because in those days it was dirt cheap to do so.
Yeah.
So it looks as if the government is behind this. It looks like Andy Burnham is behind this. Gary Neville is behind this. And if you're going to have a 100,000 capacity stadium, then you've got to have the transport links. You've got to have an expansion in the hospitality trade in Manchester to be able to deal with the demand on those occasions. I suspect, and we've not seen any details in terms of the stadium, but I find it impossible to believe that they can't have seen the amazing work that's taken place at Spurs from a business point of view in turning the stadium into, it's first and foremost, it's a multi-function stadium, so it can be used for NFL. It's got, Spurs, of course, have got the go-karting track underneath. They've got all of those additional features. They now have the 30 non-footballing events taking place each year, all of which will direct additional revenues to that part of London, in the case of Spurs, and in theory towards that part of Manchester. Where I'm a little bit sceptical is the claim that it will bring in an extra £7 billion worth of investment in revenue into Manchester, because that will have to come from somewhere outside of the country. Because if more people are going to Manchester, then less people are going to Stratford-upon-Avon, less people are going to Bath, less people are going to Leicester. People are going to come to this as a sort of a glorified tourist attraction, which it's not, in my opinion. So I don't believe all the stories that you hear from the consultants, and that's partly due to the fact that every time we've seen a World Cup being proposed, you get a glossy brochure, and that will be part of the pitch to FIFA, or in the case of the IOC, the pitch from the London Olympics Committee. And I remember in 2005, because I was teaching in Moscow on the day that the Olympics was awarded to London, and Moscow was one of the competitors, and the students were not particularly happy that day on the back of that. But all of the claims, if you recall, about the London Olympics is that it would be a boost to the UK economy, and surprise, it wasn't. It was yes, some more people came to London for 4 weeks, but other tourists who were planning on coming to London to 4 weeks gave it a miss because it coincided with the Olympics. And quite a few people who lived in London decided they're going to get out of London. They'd rent out their houses, they go and stay elsewhere. So on a net basis, these things don't tend to be successful. And I've got all of the economic data from every single World Cup where every single one has had a negative impact upon the economy, with the exception of Germany in 2006. And the only reason why Germany in 2006 made a very slight positive impact upon the German economy is because the stadiums were already there, and the infrastructure, the transport, the hotels, and everything else was already there as well. So that's where we are sceptical. The other big issue is, okay, if it's going to cost £2 billion, where is that money coming from?
Yeah.
I don't think that they can take out the equivalent of a 100% mortgage. So is it that INEOS are going to provide some funding? But if you take a look at INEOS, they've got their hands full with other big CapEx projects. Could it be that Jim Ratcliffe will want this to be his legacy and therefore will put some form of financial contribution to it in the form of perhaps an interest-free loan? Perhaps he will cash in some of his personal investments. That's a possible, but I think if he did that, he'd probably resent the fact if he was putting in money and nothing was coming from the Glazers, and we expect nothing to come from the Glazers. So there will have to be some more money borrowed. Manchester United fans rightly have a distaste towards debt, given the history of what we've seen with the Glazers. My view is that there's good debt and bad debt, because it's not debt's not the problem, it's how you use it. Spurs have used the debt to triple the matchday income. They've tripled the commercial income at White Hart Lane. The Glazers used the debt to make themselves a fortune and put nothing into Manchester United itself in 2005. So if it's spent well, I don't see an issue. And I do think the club has the capacity to generate so much extra revenue that it will cover the interest costs.
To be fair to the 2012 Olympics, Kieran, it did provide a big boost to West Ham's economy.
Yes. And you're still paying for it, of course.
And I still pay, yeah. And basically, when it comes to where you've lived in Manchester, essentially, if Morrissey sung about it, you lived
I
it.
I have, that's right.
Pretty much. You sort of answered the question about the funding, Kieran, which, of course, we won't know for some time the details of how it's going to be funded, other than it's going to be funded privately. But it seems a bit counterintuitive to think that the Glazers still owe 70%?
70% of the shares, yeah, about that, yeah.
So they still own 70% of the shares. We're told that Ratcliffe basically has bought the football interest of Manchester United. He's running the football side. Therefore, you'd imagine they're going to do really rather well out of a new stadium, aren't they? And yet you suggest that they won't be funding anything towards it.
Well, historically, they've never put a dime into the club. It could be that their share of Manchester United decreases because they might go to some external shareholders to put in fresh money. They might do something similar to what we've seen at Real Madrid, where Madrid have effectively created, if you've heard of these private seat licenses, where you pay a big upfront fee and that provides early funding. I know they did that at Brighton with the Amex Stadium, for example. And then I think you can sell that license at a later point in time, but the club gets the money up front, and therefore it can use that money as part of the funding for the stadium. But I have no concerns whatsoever, and I've been monitoring Manchester United's share price as well quite carefully to see the reaction of the market. And it did a small dip, 2 or 3 percentage points. I'm slightly more concerned that Manchester United's share price is down over 20% this calendar year to date, and we're only, we're not yet into mid-March. But that's a separate issue. So I don't see this as being a problem in terms of funding. They will have done their homework. They will come up with something. The CEO, Omar Barada, did say we can't go into any details because we're a quoted company on the New York Stock Exchange. And he's absolutely right about that, which sort of brings us to the second Manchester United issue, is that 24 hours before the stadium was announced, Jim Ratcliffe is going around telling Gary Neville and other assorted journalists that, we had to make all of these redundancies because, in his quote, his words, we were in danger of running out of cash by Christmas. And that seems to be hugely inconsistent with the largesse that we've seen the following day. So I've had a look at the numbers. I don't really understand where Jim Ratcliffe is coming from, because if they are in danger of running out of money by Christmas, how come on the 31st of December they had £97 million in the bank? You know, if that's what's being skint is, I hate to think what being wealthy is in the eyes of Jim Ratcliffe. So that does seem a bit strange. And also, if there were genuine cash flow problems, why did Manchester United spend £230 million buying new players in the summer 24 window? Why did they also spend £21 million with a swap of the managers? Why did they spend £4 million on a redundancy package for Dan Ashworth? So all of these things just don't really add up. I just get the impression that Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe have been taken aback by the level of scrutiny that has arisen. Manchester United is the biggest club in the country. In terms of noise, in terms of clicks, in terms of social media appeal and regular media appeal, and Manchester United's got its own cottage industry in terms of publications and so on, and rightly so. You know, it is an iconic football club, but it does therefore mean that every small decision which is made is going to be picked up upon, and I don't think that Jim Ratcliffe is used to negative publicity at the same level that he's incurred over the course of the last few months.
If you say they're aiming to build it in 5 years, Kieran, is that enough time for us, you and I, to start a company called Offshore Gym and raise enough money to bid for the naming rights of the stadium, just so it's called the Offshore Gym Stadium?
I can put some wheels into motion in that overnight, okay. I think.
Yeah, we'll need a lot of money, but I think we can do it. Our next story, it says here that the bosses of the Premier League and the EFL have held secret talks. Now, how we know about this, Kieran, that's one of our secret people in the Premier League and the EFL have told us. I don't know, but they've held secret talks. What have they been secretly talking about, Kieran?
Well, according to this story in one of the newspapers, I think there were 8 clubs, 4 from the Premier League and 4 from the EFL, and by all accounts, Richard Masters and our very good friend Trevor Birch. And we didn't want to put Trevor into an awkward position, so therefore we've deliberately not contacted him to say, "Oi, Trevor, it's true." I don't think that's fair on us. I've got huge respect for Trevor, but there is still opposition to the independent regulator from the Premier League, and we know that to be the case, and that is almost universal. I think some clubs are indifferent, some clubs are very vehemently opposed. The only club which is in favour of the independent regulator in the Premier League, to my knowledge, is Manchester City.
Yeah.
And then in the EFL itself, the EFL have decided to attach their support to the regulator, even though prior to the proposals by the government, they seem to be wavering a little bit. But there's still a few individual clubs who are also opposed to the regulator, quite often on ideological grounds in terms of the views of the owner. So I think what's happened here is, and my argument has been, if the Premier League and the EFL can come up with a long-term distribution deal, which is more generous than the current deal, which perhaps doesn't get rid of parachute payments, because I think parachute payments are a necessity to have a competitive Premier League. And I know people don't want to hear this. A competitive Premier League is more important than a competitive Championship. And the reason why I say that is because the Premier League delivers the broadcasting deals. It delivers the global interest to a far greater extent than the Championship. But to perhaps give a slight tweak to those, then sort of 2/3 of what the regulator's involved with potentially is going to be sorted. Equally, we've argued that given that the Premier League has had over 3 years since the initial proposals for an independent regulator, it's sat on its hands and it has not put together a proposal. I know things have been discussed at chief executive meetings. And certainly when we had the Premier League on our show a few weeks ago, they said, well, why do we need to make a proposal? Because there's already a deal. But that's a bit like assuming existing legislation is okay. And I look at sort of some of the issues which I've sort of been vaguely involved with. If you take, for example, age of consent, if LGBT, age of consent was 21 for gay men and 16 for heterosexual men. Well, that was existing legislation. So according to the Premier League, we got something, therefore you don't need to change it. Doesn't mean that it was right, though.
Yeah.
So I think the Premier League's argument is a weak one, but at least there has been talks, and the Premier League's fear, and I've had this from a few parties, they don't trust some people at the EFL, and their fear is that if they agree a deal now, the EFL will go along with it for the moment, and then they will try to trigger the backstop where the regulator has to decide on a final deal of a proposal of either that of the Premier League or the EFL at a late point in time, in the hope that the EFL manage to extract further concessions. I'm not sure that that's the case.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Xyzal is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Xyzal keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Xyzal. At night.
Still with the EFL, Kieran, Chairman Rick Parry, it seems, might discuss the idea of 3 up, 3 down with the National League, but he doesn't want to discuss it separately.
Yes, and I have a lot of sympathy with the EFL in terms of the financial distribution relationship with the Premier League. And I think it can, to a certain extent, take a moral high ground there. And then it immediately loses that moral high ground by trying to say that 3 up, 3 down is part of the deal that they've got with the Premier League. And it's not. They're completely independent of one another.
Yeah,
it's a bit like me deciding what pair of socks I'm going to wear is linked to what I'm going to have for breakfast. And the only two things they've got in common is that they're both taking place in the morning, but they are completely independent of one another. So it does seem that the EFL here is delaying in exactly the same way that the Premier League is. I understand why some of its members don't want 3 up, 3 down. And if so, have a vote. If it goes against, well, at least you've had the vote. But don't try to sort of offer it as a sort of a throwaway benefit. Take a look at the broader issues in terms of the level of professionalism that we're seeing in the National League. And the National League has to improve its act as well, because the level of financial scrutiny in the National League probably isn't good enough at present. So that one did. And also, I think Rick Parry said in that same interview that he felt that a deal with the Premier League was a long way away, which seems to be inconsistent with the story that we've just run in terms of, and so we deliberately have not contacted people because I just don't feel comfortable. We've got a very good relationship with Trevor and so on.
Sorry, Kay, I'm interested to hear you say the level of National League financial scrutiny is probably not enough. Are you talking about the scrutiny of individual clubs?
Yes. Yeah, they don't have the equivalent of PSR or the squad
Right.
or the salary cap management protocol that exists in League One and League Two, you can buy your way out of the National League to far easier than perhaps you can in the EFL. And to be fair, to give the EFL credit, they really have upped their game when it comes to investigating their own clubs in terms of their finances compared to where we were under the Sean Harvey regime.
Mm. You've been telling us in the last couple of weeks, Kieran, that certain people in Spanish football really don't like the Premier League at the moment. And we've had some figures that will perhaps explain why that is.
Yes, UEFA have, in recent years, published their sort of financial landscape review of European football. And you can go to the UEFA website and download it. It's nerd heaven. It looks at so many different metrics, so many different financial parameters and ratios and relationships. And I was reading it on the train from Brighton to Liverpool, and it made the journey practically, in seconds. I was just so engrossed. I suspect I may be in the minority here. I'll be the first to admit this. But one of the things which is clear is that the Premier League is a spectacular success and deserves a lot of credit for the relationships it's built up with international broadcasters, international sponsors, international fan bases, and so on. It does mean that it has far outstripped the success of the other European leagues. And we're men of a certain age, Kevin. We're old enough to remember when Italians football was the thing as far as Europe is concerned, and then it was Spanish football, and then the Premier League has crept up on the rails. It's sold its rights initially for nothing, and then it started charging more when those other European leagues, I think, were just being a little bit too complacent. And now it's really stretched ahead. So the Premier League is now making twice as much revenue as the Spanish and German league, 4 times as much as France. And I suspect when you get the full set of French figures for 24-25, given the implosion in terms of the value of the French TV deal, it will probably be 6 or 7 times. And what does this mean? Well, this is really good for people that support clubs such as Crystal Palace and Brighton, because it means that the clubs that we support can outbid practically the whole of Europe, with the exception of those sort of 10 or 11 clubs, which are always going to be in the Champions League as far as their national associations are concerned. And this is perhaps part of the reason why we're seeing a slight realignment in the Premier League itself, in the sense that the middle classes can now recruit players of a calibre that can be more of a challenge for the traditional Big Six. And of course, this is why the Big Six wanted Project Big Picture, because that would have prevented things like this. The Big Six didn't want any competition at all. And that attempt at a domestic coup of the game was rightfully, effectively, stopped in its very early stages of publication. But it does indicate that if you are the 6th best team in Spanish football, you're generating less money than the side finishing bottom of the Premier League. And that's great for the Premier League. It's not necessarily great for Spanish football, where you've got a far greater gap between rich and poor than you have here in England.
It's almost impossible to see that difference between the Premier League and the rest of Europe redressed in any way, Kieran, isn't it? And unless European football tries to go for their own independent regulator and make us share the money more. But you can't see any way that the Premier League is going to get less popular, or many ways in which European football will be more popular.
That's right. I think as far as the broadcast deals are concerned, the Premier League has had what we refer to as first mover advantage, in that it's signed up 190 different countries around the world. Well, if you think about, we both love football. I like German football, I like Italian football, I like Spanish football. But given the amount of coverage we get from the domestic game, I don't have time to watch that at the weekend. And so therefore, if you are a football fan in the Caribbean, if you're a football fan in Southeast Asia, the Premier League got there first, and therefore it started to build up the fan bases for Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and these other big clubs, big brands, and so on. And what we find in football is that there is brand loyalty, which is far greater than for practically any other product. So to get large swathes of viewers to say, actually, I want to stop supporting Manchester United and want to go and support Barcelona or Atletico Madrid as my sort of European football team. It doesn't work like that, football fandom. And I know that there's some evidence that younger fans follow players rather than the clubs themselves, but I'm not convinced about that. I mean, I'm very fortunate where I teach in Liverpool that I teach an international cohort of students, and they are all Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal fans, and so on. And they said, if a player goes, I support the badge, not the player.
Yeah, I met quite a few of your students last week. A very pleasant bunch of young people they are too. I like to think, though, Kieran, on that train of yours from Brighton to Liverpool, I like to think of all the other passengers forming a WhatsApp group and messaging each other just to say, that tall bloke, what is he reading in the corner that's making him so happy? Because we need a slice of that. Whatever he's doing is putting a big old smile on that man's face. It's never a good thing, Kieran, when world politics infringes on football, really. But unfortunately, the current Ukraine conflict means that that's exactly what's happening this week with Roman Abramovich and UK ministers.
Yes, Roman Abramovich in 2021, when
sorry about that. That's the creaking door effect.
That's brilliant creaking door effect.
It's the door is actually fine. I just press a little button when anyone comes in, just to make it sound like a Carry On film.
So when Russia invaded Ukraine a fair time ago, at the time, Roman Abramovich said, I am going to relinquish my control of Chelsea Football Club, and the proceeds of the sale of the club are going to be used to assist the victims of the conflict in Ukraine. Now, he didn't define what he says by victims, and there is a case for saying, and I think it's a very strong case for saying that the families of those young men in the main who have been conscripted and sent to be maimed and killed by Vladimir Putin, they are victims of this, because that wasn't their idea when they got to the ages of 17 and 18. But that £2.5 billion from the sale proceeds is sitting in a bank account. I have been in contact with some people at Whitehall, and they said, why is that money not being distributed to provide relief in Ukraine? And they say the money has been frozen. It has not been seized by the UK government. So that is an important legal distinguishing factor. And it would appear that somebody from the Roman Abramovich camp, we don't know whether it's Roman Abramovich, we don't know whether it's his descendants who are saying, oi, that's our inheritance. They are saying that they don't feel that money should be utilised in Ukraine. And a lot of that money is potentially being held via companies in the likes of Cyprus, where there's a slightly different legal system. And there's a lot of lawyers rubbing their hands together saying, well, we can put in delaying tactics for this. At the same time, of course, the people who are the genuine victims of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and from the Ukrainian conflict, they're not getting any further relief from what was supposed to be a humanitarian gesture from Roman Abramovich, who, it has to be said, has gone completely AWOL.
There was a really interesting stroke horrifying article in The Observer on Sunday about continuing Russian influence in UEFA. in that whilst the Russian national team is banned from taking part in UEFA competitions, Russian nationals are not banned from holding positions on UEFA committees, some of which are very influential. We haven't got time to go into that in great detail today, but it was a slightly disturbing thing to find out. And also, I'm slightly worried that it seems, doing a bit of research around this story, that the word final and final attempt to free up this money is being used quite a lot, which makes you worried that it's not going to get anywhere, is it, this money?
That is a genuine concern. And if somebody says something a few years ago, to what extent can they be held to that? We know that politicians do U-turns. Could it be that there's some form of U-turn taking place from Roman Abramovich? So I get Google alerts on an awful lot of topics, including Roman Abramovich, and that particular email rarely pings these days. So it is an individual who has very much gone to ground for somebody that was so high profile in this country during his period of ownership of the club.
Meanwhile, on the pitch at Stamford Bridge, Kieran, we have some news that will confirm the prejudices and suspicions of many non-Chelsea supporters.
That's right. Again, going back to the UEFA financial summary report, Chelsea Football Club have the most expensive club in the history of football. So far higher than Real Madrid under its Galacticos, far higher than Manchester City when they've had some splurges in the past. And not only is it the biggest, it's the biggest by over 300 million euros. And to put that in context, if you look at the total cost of the Brighton squad or the Palace squad, that wouldn't be 300 million euros. So it does show that under Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital, there has been some sort of strategy, some sort of plan. Nobody's exactly quite sure what it is, but it has involved huge amounts of money being spent, creative use of amortization, and has that given Chelsea an advantage on the pitch? Well, they're not doing badly, but if that's the most that money can buy, I suspect many Chelsea fans would have hoped to have a greater return on that investment.
So this squad, containing as it does Cucurella and Caicedo, I don't know why I choose those two, Kieran, but containing as it does those two players, is the most expensive squad ever assembled in football history, not just English football history, in football history.
In world football history, yes. It certainly beats the big clubs in Spain, Germany, PSG, and so on. But then we're still awaiting Chelsea's 23-24 accounts. Chelsea by far had the most expensive squad in the Premier League at the end of 2023. And then we've had a further acceleration of investment in players since then. So it will be interesting to see just how far ahead. And like many clubs, they buy a lot of those players on tick. So, but based on my most recent figures, I had it down that I think Chelsea owed £491 million, practically £500 million in unpaid instalments for, as much as I dislike Mark Cucurella for having no ethics or morals, in my view, in the way that he engineered his transfer. He's a good footballer, but that includes a lot of other players. You're saying, well, I think they vastly overpaid for X and Y and Z and so on. And the problem they've now got, and this was something which was also included in Offshore Jim's comments to the media at earlier this week, is that Jadon Sancho is playing for Chelsea, but in June we've got to go and pay £17 million in the next instalment on his transfer. We owe instalments on Casemiro. We owe instalments on other signings as well. And Manchester United owe close to £400 million themselves in unpaid transfers. And that money has to be paid before you can set off on your next splurge of player recruitment.
Oh, it's such a shame this is not a football pod, Kieran, because that's preventing me from saying, wow, they're still paying for Casemiro. Holy mother of God. you'd have taken him back to the shop a long time ago, wouldn't you? If you'd already paid for him, you'd have been.
Yeah. I think it's sold as seen in the world of football.
Fair point. Now, this story was breaking, Kieran, just as we started our questions pod the other day, and we promised we'd put some more meat on the bones, so to speak. I mean, it's a blip I was going to say a blip in the ocean, but that would be a terrible mixed metaphor, wouldn't it? A blip in the ocean. It's just a blip in the ocean for Nottingham Forest. It's a small bump a small bump on a successful road. I need to put more thought in these things before we start, rather than trying to make them as we go along. It's a tiny setback for Forest, Kieran, but it's probably a victory for referees, isn't it?
I think it is. Following Nottingham Forest's defeat, I think it was at Everton. Nottingham Forest put out a tweet, effectively questioning the integrity of Stuart Atwell by saying, and I think Stuart Atwell was actually on VAR, so it wasn't even criticising the referee; it was criticising. Yeah. So Forest had 3 penalty appeals. I think as the man on the Clapham omnibus or the man in the Pawson's arms, whoever we're going to be, you say, I think one of those was probably a pen. I'm not so sure about the others. But VAR didn't overturn the referee's decisions. And then Forest sort of put out a series of messages along the lines of, Stuart Atwell is, according to our sources, a Luton Town fan. Luton Town are a rival of Nottingham Forest in terms of relegation. And therefore, we think he has compromised his integrity and so on. And the Premier League, I think, and the FA, I think have rightly said, well, hold on, that's completely, that is overboard. You can say that a referee's made a bad decision, and if you talk to referees, they will say, yeah, I make bad decisions every match. Yeah, because you tell me which person in which job gets 100% of things right every single day, and that person's not yet been created. So referees do make errors. Players cheat, and yet players don't get the same level of abuse for cheating that referees get. So the FA initially fined Forest. I think Forest were very reluctant to remove the tweet, so it ended up being viewed over 40 million times on social media. And Stuart Atwell got an awful lot of grief from that, and that's. I don't think that's good. If you want to attract better quality referees into the game, then you've got to have a supply of referees. And if I was thinking about becoming a referee as a young person, I'd go, well, why bother? Because the level of abuse is not matched by the level of remuneration, that's for sure. So the appeal by Nottingham Forest was rejected, and therefore they do have to pay that £750,000 fine. I'm not quite sure where that fine goes. It won't go to PGMOL, that's for sure, because this is done by the FA. But I think it is showing that for all of the criticism which can be levelled at referees, say they're imperfect, but they're doing the best that they can, that they do need protection, and clubs need to act with a greater degree of maturity.
I should point out, Kieran, there's a lot of women on that Clapham omnibus as well.
Yes, true.
And in the Pawson's Arms.
And in the Pawson's Arms.
A lot of women in the Pawson's Arms. We don't know where the money's going to, Kieran. Where's it coming from? Is this a fine levelled against the owner? Is this a fine levelled against the club?
No, it went from it was on the Nottingham Forest social media account, so therefore It is the responsibility of the club itself. And I think the commission took a dim view of Nottingham Forest's reluctance to remove it when it was suggested it wasn't a particularly appropriate thing to say.
And before somebody asks us this for our questions pod, Kieran, that £750,000 fine will, of course, be in the accounts next year or the year after. Where does it fit with the PSR?
It's tough. If you get no additional allowance for it. It's part of the cost of running a football club. You shouldn't have done it in the first place. It's a bit similar to a tax return. If if you get fined for something, the tax authority says, well, you shouldn't have done the offence in the first place. We're going to make that tax deductible for you.
Right. So this counts as a loss then for PSR.
PSR, yeah.
Well, okay.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss. Oof, like wind in your hair carefree. Oh, like using Clorox disinfecting all-purpose cleaner in the home carefree. Yes. Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox carefree. He's on a roll now. Spit toothpaste on the faucet. You got it. You got it. Peanut butter on the light switch. Oh, spritz, spritz. Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good. Okay, we're back. Use as directed.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
We've mentioned the Man United stadium, Kieran, but Everton have announced a new way of funding their new stadium.
That's right. I mean, Everton had some unusual lenders. MSP Capital, I think, was one of them. A company called Rights and Media Funding, which was based in a little office in Cheshire, and it had no employees, and it itself borrowed offshore, not sure from whom. But by all accounts, Everton were paying some pretty horrendous rates of interest on these loans, and the new owners that have come in, the Friedkin Group, and they have effectively settled the old loans and taken out new ones. Now, the figures I've seen quoted that it will save Everton £50 million a year in interest, I think those estimates are too high. But I still think that there will be a substantial reduction in the interest costs for Everton, which can only be welcomed by all fans of the Toffees. Yes, every pound less in interest that you are paying is £1 more that can go into your playing budget. That's the way to view these things. And again, sort of, the initial observations of the Friedkin Group is that they're not making lots of noise. There's not lots of look at me, we're the new owners, that perhaps you might have seen from some other clubs in the Northwest over the course of the last few months. And on the back of that, they just seem to be wanting to get on with the job.
So basically, Kieran, they've done what every bank asked us to do until about 8 years ago. They've consolidated all their debts into one easily repayable loan. Is that right?
Yes, and they're effectively using the high esteem in which the Friedkin Group are held by the finance community to be able to go and borrow at a lower rate of interest. Part of the problem that Farhad Moshiri had was when he appeared to lose some of his friends who had been assisting him in terms of funding the club, then Everton were perceived as being a very high credit risk, which meant that lots of banks wouldn't touch them. And those lenders who would touch them would say, we think you're high risk. High risk means high interest rate. Friedkin Group are not perceived in a similar manner, and therefore you're getting a much lower rate of interest on these borrowings.
So presumably then, if the 777 takeover had gone through, they'd be paying astronomical interest.
I just dread to think what would have happened. Right. And again, I know many Evertonians have a very dim view of the Premier League. I think the Premier League did a really good job here in delaying and making it as awkward as they can or could in terms of trying to ensure that 777 didn't get in a position where they're actually taking in charge of Everton. Because Farhad Moshiri didn't care who he was selling to. He's somebody gives me a few quid for my shares, I'm out of here straight away. I don't think his concern was from a legacy point of view for the best interest of the football club.
Now, this time last week, Kieran, we were in Liverpool. We were talking to Tom, one of the founders of Castor, the British kit company. The finances and the politics of Adidas were discussed as well, and the fact that they were considered the elite shirt providers in European football. And lo and behold, Liverpool have signed a deal with them.
They have. Liverpool have a current deal with Nike, which everybody knew was expiring this summer. I think it's expiring on the 31st of July, which does mean that when Liverpool go on tour at the end of this season or the start of next season, they will be wearing Nike kit. But Adidas are going to be paying £60 million a year compared to Nike's £30 million. But it was felt that Nike were offering a much bigger commission per unit. I think Nike was supposedly giving Liverpool 20% for every piece of merchandise sold, whereas I think under the Adidas deal, they're probably getting 6 to 7%. But if you add up the numbers, it's certainly a step up for Liverpool. Adidas appear to have a new strategy of trying to get some more elite clubs as within their portfolio of manufacturing deals, and expect to see Adidas trying to get that £60 million back through as many methods as possible. So if anybody thinks that the £85 that you're currently paying for Liverpool shirts going to be decreased, I think most savvy fans will know that that's not the case. And there's been some really interesting articles in The Athletic in the past few days looking at counterfeit and hooky kits. And my personal view is you know that it's counterfeit as a fan, in exactly the same way that you know that a dodgy Fire Stick is an illegal method of watching football streams. But talking to people, talking to fans in pubs, talking to fans at matches, they say, if the kits were being sold for 40 quid instead of 85, we'd probably buy the legitimate one. The cost of buying kits, especially if you've got a young family, and of course, the kids want the latest kit, has become, in the eyes of many, prohibitively expensive. And therefore, the alternatives where you can buy exactly the same kit, which is probably 95% of the quality of the genuine Adidas product, for 1/5 or 1/8 of the price, is an avenue that people will go down, and it's seen as a victimless crime. And the Premier League can legitimately say, well, some of these kits are being made in sweatshops. You don't know the working conditions. At least we can hold, in theory, the likes of Adidas and Nike to account. We can't do for the hooky. And I absolutely understand where they're coming from, in exactly the same way as you don't exactly know where your 50 or 60 quid is going for a dodgy Fire Stick. But if it's going to save you 300 or 400 quid a year in terms of subscriptions, people are going to do it.
Yeah. More importantly, your 3-year-old kid doesn't know it's a hooky kit, does he?
No.
And until he gets a bit older and says, "Dad, aren't there 2 O's in Liverpool?" How many other clubs, Kieran, around the world are being paid by the kit supplier rather than paying the kit supplier?
At the elite end of football, all of the manufacturers are paying for the privilege, because if you think about it from their point of view, if your club is playing in Europe tonight, if you're Aston Villa, their kits deal is with Adidas. Adidas is it called the trefoil? Is being seen in millions upon millions of households around the world. And therefore, it's effectively 90 minutes of free advertising for the logo of Adidas, and they're prepared to pay for that privilege. How much they're prepared to pay depends upon the size and the brand of the club itself and the popularity of the club in international markets.
We finished, Kieran, with "Be Still My Beating Heart," 2 stories about FIFA. The first one is, I'm trying not to swear here, Kieran, but they are fucking desperate to get this Club World Cup going and to get clubs taking part in it, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, I think initially when they announced the FIFA Club World Cup, there was talk of £1.6 billion or dollars in prize money being available. That's now been reduced to £1 billion. But even so, if you look at the number of clubs involved, we are talking about tens of millions for participation. And £40 or £50 million to Chelsea and Manchester City, who are the Premier League's representatives in this competition, it certainly helps, but it's, in the case of Manchester City, it's probably about the equivalent of 6 or 7% of their total revenues. If you take a look at some of the other clubs that are participating in this competition, it's going to be more than 100% of their annual revenues. And this is where I've got slight concerns, because if you are from one of the African leagues or one of the Asian leagues and so on, and all of a sudden you've got a $50 million bonus arriving, that's going to allow you to buy all of the best players in your domestic league. And my concern on the back of that is it's going to create dynasties where the same club wins the league year in, year out. And somebody did analysis of this in terms of European football, and it is increasing. I think we are very fortunate in the Premier League. People say, well, hold on, City have won it 6 years out of the last 7, but they won it on the last day of the season, I think on 3 or 4 of those occasions. And I think that dynasty looks like it's come to an end. Now, it might resurrect itself. We'll have to wait and see. But that's not being seen elsewhere in Europe. And FIFA is a classic case of unintended consequences in order to make their shiny bauble of a competition. I don't know whether you saw the unveiling of the trophy in the White House. And even Donald Trump looked completely bemused at the gleeful way that Gianni Infantino put this in front of him. And then he brought out a key. It was a bit like watching a game show. I was half expecting some gold sovereigns to fall out. And even Trump was sort of trying to walk away from it, whereas Infantino was looking smug, which is an unusual feature of Gianni Infantino's face.
He was looking smug in the trophy, Kieran. It's very highly polished.
Yes.
And let's face it, if Donald Trump thinks something's tacky, you've got a problem, haven't you? Meanwhile, Kieran, the FIFA World Cup, the finals of 2030, it's going to take some doing not to qualify for them.
That's right. I think this blindsided quite a few of the people within FIFA itself. But at a recent meeting of FIFA executives, the representative of Uruguay, who are one of the hosts of the 2030 World Cup, said, tell you what, instead of the 48, and 48 seems a random number that we've got taking place as far as the FIFA Men's World Cup is concerned. But as far as that is concerned, let's have 64 clubs. And you're thinking, well, hold on, how many matches are going to take place? And if this is going to take place in South America and Morocco and Europe and so on, and a lot of cynics, and it has to be stressed, we're not amongst them because we're not a cynical show. But a lot of cynics are saying that the 2030 World Cup was engineered in such a way as it meant that you couldn't have a 2034 World Cup in Europe or South America or Africa. So therefore, hey, it's got to go to Saudi Arabia. It does seem, as much as I love a World Cup, you look at the clubs in those who are 63rd and 64th, it's something like Jordan versus Bhutan or something like that, and you go, I might be struggling. And then I'm also thinking, how much is this going to cost me to put together my Panini collection?
Well, I was about to say you took the words out of my mouth, Kieran, but to be honest, your Panini collection was the last thing on my mind. But I was wondering, if you're talking about 64 teams qualifying, there will be some very small nations who are qualifying, and we're all for it. We're all for inclusivity. Of course we are. It's a World Cup. But there are going to be some nations who are thinking, we can't afford this. I mean, we've seen it in the Women's World Cup with Jamaica, when they were pretty much saying, we can't afford to send a team to the tournament. There are going to be countries who are going, this is not something we can afford. And it just, it also makes a mockery of the qualifying pro. What the Europe? Of course, we're talking about Europe. That's the football we know best. You might as well just say to England, Spain, Italy, Germany, well, you're through, because the qualifying groups are going to be so ridiculously easy that you might as well put them straight through. It's the logistics of this are ridiculous. I've always argued that there should be another tournament, mainly for the teams who won't qualify for World Cups. But like I say, I mean, it's about a third of the countries in the world will be qualifying for the World Cup final. And not only that, but think about, people talk about the environment. You've now got, instead of 20 years ago, you had 16, then 24 teams flying across the globe. Now you've got 64 teams flying across the globe, and it's in 3 separate continents already. And plus the logistics of hotels, whatever, it just seems ludicrous, Kieran.
And the side I'm going to feel most sorry for is the side which is 65th. Can you imagine how you're going to feel?
Yeah,
I've actually now called up the FIFA rankings in front of me. 63rd, United Arab Emirates. 64 is Jordan. I think 65 is Albania. I personally would quite like the idea of Albania at a World Cup. 66, Burkina Faso. I think.
Who?
Burkina Faso.
Oh, Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
I generally thought you said Pinot Grigio there, Kieran. I thought so. I found somebody else to support in the World Cup. That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, I get, I'd be interested to find, maybe we could do that for the next pod, Kieran, as I'd be interested to see what the finances are of the Burkina Faso FA. Or then, again, unless it comes back to being cynical, we find that FIFA are subsidising these teams with a little bit of money to be able to fly to the World Cup in the first place, thus making sure they vote for Gianni Infantino at the next election, if there is a next election.
Well, there is a next election, and I'm sure Gianni would like to put himself forward to be the ever president or the equivalent of. And what a better way to do it than to have such a big competition.
Well, it won't be a proper election like last time when everyone waved on Zoom until he said they were waving enough. Thank you to everyone who's donated to Pod via our Patreon page and everyone who's now joined the brand new Price of Football Club. If you'd like to join that club too, and I believe Patreon has been switched off, which sounds very final, but so if you'd like to join the club too and get ad-free listening and invite to our monthly Q&A sessions, bonus episodes, early access to interviews and more, go to our website, priceoffootball.com. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on X and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy one of our excellent books or even a Price of Football t-shirt, you can find all the details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, for those of you who aren't club members, with a lovely interview with John Attenborough, who's a blind football fan who visited every league club in Scotland with his dog Sam, and we'll be back on Tuesday with our next questions episode. Until then, I'll hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks to everybody that's been in contact, saying some very nice things, saying some less nice things, but we need to know about the less nice things as well. Just a reminder that we are coming to Rotherham United on Monday the 28th of April, so we had to change that date. We're really looking forward to it. We are in negotiation at present to have a guest or two to have a chat to up on the stage. For people who don't know what it's like, it's a bit like both of our podcasts put together. We start off with a chat about the latest stories in football, and then we have a halftime break, and the second half of the show is given over to you, the audience. And for those of you who have, I know one of our listeners said, I had my question answered on Price of Football this week and was dead chuffed. You don't have to go and wait 8 months. So it's worth that for the tickets itself. And I think the tickets are very, very reasonable priced. I think it's just £18 each. So you'll have a great time. It's a genuinely good show. We love doing it. We love meeting the people that come and watch us as well. And there will be a bit of a South Yorkshire flavour to the show in some way, shape or form.
There will be. Please bear in mind that the Baroness will be there. So try and make your questions about football, because you do not want the full glare of the Baroness's stare heading in your direction. For those of you who know your Lord of the Rings, it's a bit like the Eye of Sauron. You don't want it looking at you, Kieran, do you?
No.
You sounded like Terry Scott in the 70s sitcom then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.